Okay, we are live. Michael Jackson Book Club. Hi, everyone, all around the world. I see that there are so many of you already waiting, highly anticipating this event. I'm not surprised at all. Hello, everyone. So, today we have a special guest, Talitha Linehan, the author of this book right here, which looks like a fairy tale from the cover itself. And we are so honored to be talking to her. How many of you discovered Talitha through her blog that was online years ago? That's how I found out about this whole story. And I think I was on the train one time when I found it, and I was just like poring over it for hours and hours. I got home, I was poring over it for hours and hours, and then I couldn't find it, and I was looking for it, and I mentioned it in the book club, and then like months later the book came out. I was like, divine timing, perfect timing. I couldn't believe it. And I was like, the thing about having a fan follower story and having such a detailed story from Talitha is that a lot of these stories get so lost. They get buried, never to be heard again because of fan politics, things like that. But we're so blessed to have this story down on paper, recorded and documented in a book. And remember, we are also benefiting from the fact that Talitha is a professional journalist. And so this book is well written, so detailed, and so relevant to all fans who wish that they could have experienced what Talitha experienced. I tell you guys, I'm not a fast reader, but when I started this book, I couldn't put it down. Kept going until I finished it, till I devoured it. It was absolutely a pleasure. And I'll just read one little piece of this on page 114. Okay. Talitha said, "Hi, Michael." He glanced at me and did a double take, and his face lit up in a smile as he drew me into an embrace. Later, when reliving our encounter, I am delighted in the detail, in particular, in his instant recognition of and response to me. And I think that captures my feeling of this book in a nutshell, because wherever Talitha traveled, except for that one instance that she highlights in the book, it was that instant recognition of knowing exactly who she was. And it just really describes that kind of bond that her and Michael had. And I read that part over and over because I'm sure so many of us would have loved to have had that experience at least once in our lives. So it is my pleasure to just welcome Talitha to all of you. And Talitha, if you have anything to say, we'd love to hear it.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. It's such an honor.
Thank you so much. Everyone is from all over the world. Hi from Italy, hi from the Philippines, hi from Slovakia. Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Everywhere.
Wow. I see Talene.
So the amazing thing about this book is not only is it a fan memoir, fan follower memoir, fan memoir of Talitha's experiences with Michael, I also see it as kind of a coming of age book as well, because you document all the way from the time you were a child, growing up in Ireland, all the way to when you made your career in LA and called the US your home, which you still do. And it kind of just documents not only your journey with Michael, but also just you growing up. So I thought that that was a nice little bonus just to learn more about you as well. So I guess we can start with, what made you decide to write the book after all these years of his passing? You had the blog. So many of us had read the blog, and but now we have something physical in our hands. What was that deciding factor that made you put all of this in a book?
I definitely had the idea to write a book for a long time. And I definitely had friends who encouraged me to do so. But I was held back by a lot of fear and a lot of conflict. I was afraid of bearing my soul because I knew if I wrote it, I would just put my heart and soul out into it. And, I wouldn't hold back. It was going to be completely emotionally honest and open. Not to say that I was going to share every single moment of my experience, but I was going to share like the essence of it. And that's a scary thing to do, to put yourself out there like that. I also had conflict around the fact that, Michael was a public figure, but the time I spent with him was private in a lot of cases, and it certainly felt private to me. And I didn't want to make anyone feel exposed. I didn't want to expose him in any way, or his children, or the other fans that were there. So I had that concern of, intruding on privacy. Also, and really, when I had the moment of clarity, which I finally received last year, I realized that I was going to be in control of the narrative, and I could just share what I felt comfortable sharing. And if I found that anything was too intrusive in any way, I could just omit that. So that kind of took care of that issue. But, through the years, I am a storyteller. I've been a writer my entire life. It's what I do for a living. I tell stories. I tell stories about people. I tell stories about places. I do travel articles, events. And this was an untold story. And I know fans have shared their experiences of Michael and their encounters, and that's amazing and magical. And I know fans love to hear those stories. But, it's like, what comes before that moment, though? Because your experience of Michael, that might be the highlight for you, is spending time with him, meeting him. But where does that begin? You don't start loving Michael the day you're waiting outside of this hotel. So, and what is that first, inhalation of him when you kind of awaken to his presence in the world? And where do you go from there? And how do you get to that position where you're at his hotel or at his home? And then what's the quality of the whole experience? I mean, I remember talking to someone about the trial and the verdict day. And I was in the courtroom on that day, a few rows behind Michael. And she was at her work. She worked at a restaurant. She was in a kitchen. And she said, well, I know it wasn't the same. You were actually there. But I said, no, actually, it was the same. It doesn't matter that you were in the kitchen listening to this verdict being read out 5,000 miles away in Ireland, and I was sitting in the courtroom. It's like we were having the same experience because we were having the same emotional experience. She had gone through the trial just as much as I had, and gone through the ups and downs and had all of that anxiety. So, I wanted to tell that story because I know it's only my story, but I feel like there is a universal aspect to it that represents the fan story as a whole. And so all of those moments, we all experience them in our own way. So I wanted to tell that story very much. At the same time, I didn't want to tell that story because of all of that fear that I talked about. And I thought if I waited long enough, someone else would tell it and I wouldn't have to, but that never happened. So I carried that with me, that thought, that feeling for many years. But the bigger aspect, rather than just being a storyteller or wanting to tell the story, was that I wanted to be another voice of truth for Michael in the world. Because, of course, living in this world, loving Michael, it's not easy because of all the lies that are out there about him. And so I wanted to share my perspective and my experience of him. And so, that was something that really came into light during the Leaving Neverland, that whole episode, after that horrible documentary was released. And I think a lot more people started to believe the lies then, tragically. And so I felt that push even harder to speak my truth. I remember one day being in Pasadena, it's a city here in LA, and there was a graffiti on the wall. Somebody had spray painted this quote from Martin Luther King. I'm paraphrasing here, but something along the lines of, the day you see a truth and don't speak it is the day you start to die. And I remember seeing that. It was right around the time of Leaving Neverland. And it just it spoke to me. And I felt like, oh my God, I have to tell this truth. And I wanted to do it then, but I wasn't ready. And I knew I wasn't ready. And, you're not ready until you are. And it took me this long to find my voice. And so what happened was, a year ago, I had a bike accident on January 6th, 2020. I was cycling along. The bike went one way, I went the other. I hit the pavement really hard. I was out for a moment. I came to, I couldn't move. It was really scary. Nothing like that had ever happened to me before. People came and helped. They called 911. Ultimately, I was fine. but it was like a big shock. And afterwards I was thinking, like, what if I, banged my head harder? Like, what if that had been worse? What if that was it? Like, what would I regret if I was to leave my life already? And it was honestly two things. And immediately they came to mind. One was leaving my loved ones, which of course is unavoidable. And the other was not writing my story and sharing it with the world. And I knew then deep in my heart and soul, like, this was something I needed to do. And so a few days later, I started to write. And I wrote the whole book very quickly.
Oh my, that is wonderfully well said.
Thank you.
What a full and complete answer.
Thanks.
I know it was good because I think a lot of we've spoken to a lot of authors of Michael books. Yours is very unique in the sense because you were so close to him, and sharing this story puts you in a very vulnerable position, not only because it's your own life, but because of people's perceptions, et cetera, et cetera. And I just find it interesting that you brought up that Martin Luther King quote, and how you saw this as a duty, to contribute to the truth of what his life was and to tell that truth. So I think it's we're just benefiting, and others are benefiting from you sharing this very personal part of your life. And I totally understand, because it takes years to process all of what happened and the effect it had on you. And sometimes you have to be ready to go back into that those emotions from the past and those vulnerabilities, to be ready to finally share that story. So it makes complete sense. And thank you so much for doing what you did and doing all that work.
Thank you. And thank you for receiving my work. Like, that means so much to you and to me. And I love your book club. It's amazing. And I thank you so much for all of your support. You've been amazing. Seriously.
Well, it means a lot to all of us that you put the story out, because you didn't have to. You really didn't. And it's amazing. So the first thing that's very striking about this book, the cover, is how it looks. The gold, it's so ornate. The picture that you chose. How did you decide on the cover, and what do you like? What do you like most about it?
Okay, well, when it comes to the photograph, like, it was such an intuitive decision. I just thought about all of my private pictures with them. Of course, it would be a picture of Michael and me, because that's what the story is about. And that just seemed to be the right choice. I think because it's a very classic Michael Jackson look. It's what a lot of people imagine when they think of him, with his shades and his dark hair just loose like that. And he's wearing black. So that just seemed like the right choice. The cover, I mean, I have to give immense credit to my graphic designer, one of my best friends, someone who absolutely adores Michael, as everybody who was involved in this book absolutely adores Michael. So basically, I had told her, classic fairy tale theme, please. And I sent her a few examples, like from, the Grimm brothers kind of fairy tales. So I really wanted to go for that look, because that kind of sums up what the experience was to me. It felt like a real life fairy tale. And I wanted to capture that sort of magic and depth. And she came back with that cover, and I saw for the first time, I burst into tears. Aww. Because it was just like, it was perfect. It was perfect. I mean, she's amazing. She's a genius. She's a beautiful soul, and she just brought that to life for me. And that was my vision on paper. And I love it so much.
Well, it certainly fits the entire theme of the book. Like you said, it is a fairy tale. It's the fairy tale that almost all fans wish, pretty much every fan wishes that they had experienced. Yeah. And, so it's a fairy tale because you experience this pull to be near Michael, and you had so many instances where you ran into him, you had all these encounters with him, divine timing, law of attraction. I don't know what to call it, but you had this pull towards Michael since you were a young girl, and you dedicated a lot of your time to following him with some of the other fans around the world. And we have people watching from all over the world too that followed him and saw him here and there, but you were able to see him maybe the most out of a lot of us. So how are you able to do this as a teenager and a young adult, being able to travel and country hop and go to all his concerts?
Yeah, so I remember being like 13 or 14 and wanting to just get on a plane and go see Michael. I mean, I was and am obsessed with Moonwalker. I love that story so much. And I always just imagined if I went to America, I would just know where he was and I'd have that like courtyard moment of, you know, when Katie like just runs towards him and into his arms. And I imagined that happening. And I thought like it would just happen because, you know, I would find him. I'd know where to go. Of course, I wasn't allowed to go to America and look for Michael Jackson when I was 14. I actually grew up in the countryside. I grew up on a farm. Some of my parents were quite like conservative in some extent. You know, they weren't, I wouldn't say they were overly strict, but we never traveled. We definitely didn't travel ever in my childhood. My parents never traveled. So the world was kind of like a big, scary place to them. So even when I was 15 and I wanted to go to the Dangerous concert in Dublin, like that was a huge deal. I had to beg and beg and beg for months to be allowed to go. And my parents finally said, okay, you can go and your aunt's going to take you and, you know, you'll sit in the stands. And that was good enough. That was good enough. But 4 years later, that's when I really started to follow. I went to the opening history concert. And that again was with my parents' support. I was an adult by then, but a very young adult. I was still a student. I was still financially dependent on them. Fortunately, they supported my dream a little reluctantly. You know, like I remember my mom saying like, hopefully if you do this, then you'll get it out of your system. And that kind of backfired. But at least they did support me. So that's how I managed in the first years was with my parents' support. And then I started to work and make my own money. And I probably should have explained in the book how I did it, because to me, it wasn't that interesting. You know, I just had a good enough job that I made enough money to travel to see Michael. But having said that, I didn't have limitless funds by any means, and neither did any of my friends. So we would make it like as cheap as possible. Normally we booked last minute flights just because we would hear about Michael's appearance last minute. So very often, like for instance, when I was living in Munich in the early 2000s, I would book a flight on Thursday and hop on a plane on Friday to go to New York, to go to LA. Sometimes I would go to America for a weekend or for 3 days. And actually, sometimes like the immigration officers would pull aside my friends and me because we looked so suspicious. Because apparently drug dealers book last minute flights, and only drug dealers and not regular vacationers. So we were like really suspicious that we were always booking these last minute flights. But anyway, because they were last minute, they were a lot cheaper than regular flights would be, because at that point, airlines just want to fill those seats. Mm-hmm. So the flights are usually cheaper. When we got to the US, we would stay in hotels and motels. And I mean, we would like drive up there, and then one person would go in and book a room. And then 5 or 6 of us would like sneak into that room so we all could stay in one room and make it as cheap as possible. We would take turns sleeping on the floor. Again, just to make it like super cheap, because we always wanted to have money for the next trip and the next trip, and we never knew when that would be. When we had to rent a car, for example, in California, we would all like squeeze into this car. There would be 5 or 6 of us squished in there. You know, we'd get the best deal possible. Like we'd all hunt around for the cheapest deal. So we were always making those trips as affordable for everyone, for each other, for everyone in the group as possible. Now, I was in a fortunate position. Like I had a pretty well-paying job. But I had friends who worked minimum wage jobs, and they worked like 60 hours a week to make enough money so they could follow Michael. I had one friend who was a full-time student. She had a part-time job. That girl never spent a dime on anything. Like she saved every single penny. She bought clothes like once a year, and she saved every penny so she could go see Michael. So I think fan followers did whatever they needed to do so that they could go on those trips, if at all possible, you know. And I had a fairly lenient boss. I will say another thing though, as like 20 somethings, which we all basically were, like our priority was following Michael. Our priority wasn't to buy a nice car or to try to buy our first house or to get married and start a family. None of those things were our priorities. Like our priorities was to go to see Michael. And I'm not sure you could have balanced more than one priority. You know, you needed your time and your money just to do that. So in every case that I knew, you know, that was our priority. So I think that's how we did it too.
You know what? I'm glad that you went into detail about that, because I think a lot of people assume, oh, you know, these fan followers of Michael, oh, they must be rich. They must just have unlimited funds. And they were their parents just let them travel all over the world and gave them money to do this. But you guys made sacrifices. You
Yeah.
guys did it cheaply and you did it together. I think that's like what people don't think about. Maybe like the six of you got together, you got the hotel, you got the car, and you were able to kind of just make things work,
Yeah.
barely.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. You did mention that you had a lenient boss that was understanding and you could kind of go when you needed to go. But outside of that, the cost was a whole other thing. And you guys made it happen. And I
Yeah.
think that's so amazing.
Thank you.
Flexible enough to do it.
Yeah.
And so I kind of touched on this earlier, but in the book, you describe a lot of firsts that you had with Michael. The book takes us on a journey of the first time you saw him live, which you just said was the Dangerous tour. And that's another thing. In the book, you kind of just said, well, I went on the concert tour, but you didn't talk about how persistent you were with your parents and making all of that happen. You did a lot to make all of this happen for yourself and your friends. So I think that has to be appreciated.
Thanks.
The first time he noticed and recognized you, the first time he hugged you, kissed you, the first time he wrote letters to you and called you on the phone. Those reactions are very well described in the book, and we're like kind of living through those the way you write them. What was the first thing you noticed about him, his personality, or him being a father, something that surprised you that you weren't expecting?
Him being a father, I would say the first time I experienced that was at Neverland when a group of us spent a day with him in September 2003. We spent the whole day at Neverland. He took us all around. And in the evening, we'd gone to the zoo without him for a few minutes, as it turns out. It was a really quick visit. And then they brought us back to the house. And when we opened the door, he was there with little Blanket, who just started to learn to walk. And this was really the first time I saw Michael as a dad. And, he was just being such a proud daddy. And it was so cute. He was so proud of his little boy who was like just beginning to toddle and like toddling over to him. And so then Blanket came with us through the house. And at some point, another door opened and Prince and Paris appeared. And they were just like, daddy, daddy, daddy. And he ran towards them and he scooped them up into his arms and hugged them. And it was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. So that was my first time seeing him really as a dad, even though I had met the children, but very briefly, like in New York. And then I'd seen them on the public trips, just kind of being taken from the hotels to the SUVs. But that was really my first experience of him as a father. And then later, what I really noticed when I spent more time with them as a family in Vegas was the openness he had with them. Like some people talk down to children, and Michael never did that. He was definitely their dad. He would, reprimand them very gently and insist they be polite and so on. So he was an amazing father, but I felt like he was almost like their best friend as well. And they were such a little unit, it was beautiful to see that bond and to see the interaction between them.
Oh,
Wonderful.
Your book you describe, I think,
oh, thanks.
And then you can hear the laughter coming out of the car.
Yeah. And I guess talking about him in general, what surprised me was probably the complexities of him as a human being. Like growing up as a little girl, to me, he was the poster on the wall. He was the image in the video. He was the voice on the album. And I'm not sure I totally grasped his humanity because he was like a magical fairy tale character to me. And honestly, he still is. He always was. He always has been. I've never lost that. But when I started to get to know him in person or see him in person, I understood, okay, yes, he is actually a human being. And I remember the first time I saw him being angry. And I've never seen him being angry before because that's not something he would, share necessarily with the world. But it was around the time of the Sony protests. And it was kind of the first time he talked to us about that. It was in New York in 2002. So it was April 2002, I believe. And he talked to us about that. And he got so mad. And I was like, oh my God, yeah, of course he's capable of being angry. He's a full, complex human being. But it was kind of like a shock to see that for the first time. But then I also felt like really privileged to see that and to see all of the different aspects of him,
Absolutely. And I think that's what so much of us love about these personal fan accounts and fan memoirs. You get to see him as a whole and complete person. It's something that we don't get to see a lot, just from the outside looking in. All those other interviews that you did with the mainstream media, they don't care about that. They don't care about really who he was as a person, but it's really a treat for us to see him in his full range of emotions. I actually enjoy seeing, not that I enjoy seeing him angry, but I like when I come across clips where he's kind of like standing up for himself and like really being real, because he lived so much of his life in the media gaze, and he didn't have the luxury or the privilege of just really showing his true emotions out in the public. So it's nice to see some of that in here.
Thank you.
Are there any experiences that you haven't shared in your book? If so, could you please share one with us exclusively for members of Michael Jackson Book Club?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot I don't share, of course. It wasn't ever meant to be an information dump where I was just going to throw everything in. I had like over 300 pages of transcripts of conversations and just like diary entries, descriptions of all these different experiences to sift through. Writing about the earlier years was easier because there was less material. It was when I got into like 07, 08, 09, and I had so many encounters, especially in those latter 2 years. That's when it became really difficult because I had so much material and I would just have to kind of sit with it, read it, absorb it, reflect on it, see which anecdotes or snippets of conversation kind of presented themselves to me that I felt were important to include, that shed light on certain aspects of the story or of him as a person. So there's a lot I didn't include. And I remember Michael saying about a letter he wrote to me and 2 other girls. And he said of it later, I didn't want the meaning to get lost in the words. And I really carried that with me. I thought that was just a beautiful way of him saying, he didn't want to write pages and pages and pages. He wanted to keep it brief, but then also very heartfelt and where every word had meaning. So I tried to achieve that same thing in writing my book. So of course that meant being very selective. What would I share? I mean, there's so much, but I guess one thing maybe people don't know is he went to the theater a lot in Vegas. He went almost every weekend, and I went with him on numerous occasions, and he would always go in very late when the lights went down. So everybody's in there. Everyone is in there eating their popcorn, waiting for the movie to begin. And they have no idea that Michael Jackson has just entered the theater and he's gone all the way to the back. And he's always like covered up. He was always really covered up. And he would sit right in the back. And more often than not, his children were with him. And the kids would like throw popcorn at people. They were very naughty. And he would have to try to like stop them doing that because that would get people's attention, which is the opposite of what he's trying to achieve. And then he would leave. As soon as the credits started rolling, he would get up and just like leave quite subtly. And I always felt like how funny, these people have no idea they just sat and watched a movie with Michael Jackson. Like, wow.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the most amazing time I did watch a movie with him and the kids was a private screening. So that occasion, we were able to all sit right at the front row. And it was a 3D movie. It was called Fly Me to the Moon. And so we all wore these like big, goofy 3D glasses. And he laughed so loud, like his laughter filled the entire theater. And I remember reading, I guess it was in Moonwalk, how he when he watched funny things, like he would laugh really loudly. And I'd never experienced that before. And that was my first time experiencing. I'm like, yeah, he like guffawed through that movie. It was amazing. I don't think anything sounded as beautiful as Michael's laughter. And to have that filling the theater was like, it just lifted my heart. So yeah, I hope that's good enough to share.
That's adorable. Between a hee and a ha or something, I think Jermaine Jackson described his laughter as a guttural.
Yeah. And I could tell another story about making him laugh. So I would try to make him laugh sometimes, and so with my friends, we would do like little goofy things. So one day in 2009, we went to Michael's, which is this arts and crafts store. We would go there all the time because that's where we would find like, well, I always gave him like everything sparkled. Everything I gave him sparkled. There's probably glitter all over his house. Between my stuff and like having a little girl as well, a daughter, I can imagine there was glitter everywhere. But I always gave him like sparkly things just because that's what I like. And so I was always going to Michael's and like stocking up on glittery lettering and stickers and like cute sheets of paper and like cardboard and making him cute cards. So that was definitely a place where we all spent way too much money buying all this stuff because it's not cheap. But we were there one day and we found this stop sign, which was about like so big, like kind of a small road sign, but looked like a road sign, you know, those stop signs. And we thought it would be really funny to get one and hold it up for Michael. And my friends were kind of saying it as a joke, but I was like, no, let's do it. So I bought this stop sign. And that evening when he got back to Carlwood, I like went in front of the car and I held it up and he laughed so loud. I mean, I thought it was kind of funny. He thought it was hilarious. And I just heard this like peal of laughter bursting out of the SUV. And he was like rolling down the window, laughing and laughing and laughing. And it was so infectious. Everyone was laughing. All the fans were laughing. The security were laughing. And I think he liked cheekiness, you know, and that was me being a little cheeky. And that seemed to make him laugh a lot. So
That's pretty
yeah.
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 At any point after Michael returned to the US, did he discuss with you what he had planned for Neverland?
The only thing he ever said to me was that he would never sell it and he would never go back. And he went so far as to call it demonic one time. I remember when he came out in November 2008 at the Hotel Bel Air, and he talked to a small group of us for an hour, and someone asked him about Neverland, and that's how he described it, demonic. So for him, it was a place that had become absolutely tainted by evil. It's somewhere, like I said, he never wanted to go back to, but as I also said, he would never sell it. I think because it was his children's childhood home, and I got the feeling, he never said it explicitly, when I was present, but I got the feeling that he wanted to leave it up to them what to do with it.
You think, I mean, after some time, after healing, you know, maybe a little back?
Maybe, I know, who knows? I don't know really, like his language about it was so strong and so powerfully negative. And he talked about maybe building another Neverland somewhere. He talked about doing that in Ireland.
Oh, yeah.
He absolutely loved Ireland. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he would have loved the weather as much as California because he liked the heat and the sun, but he absolutely loved that country so much. So he did talk about maybe building a new Neverland there. Who knows what he would have done or if he would have gone back. I feel like he wouldn't have gone back, but who knows? You know, who knows?
Special, you know, just he would have stayed there sometimes, right? Just staying in Ireland and being happy there.
We wish that he would have stayed.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. Like, I never wanted him to come back to America after the trial because and I love America. America's my home. You know, I love LA. But, you know, I know these evil people that were responsible for the trial were still here and still in power. Tom Sneddon was still like the DA. So I really didn't want him to come back. Like, but, yeah.
Yeah. Nice to know that he had some happy times there, though, with his children in peace and people left him alone. And, you know,
in Ireland.
Yeah, they respected that.
Yeah, I know.
What do you think that was?
Super private.
Just because you are from Ireland, why do you think it was that people were just so laid back and allowing him to live his life? And what do you think that was? Because that's so rare.
I think people have that attitude, though. They want to give people their space. I don't know. Irish people are very sweet and very warm-hearted, and I think they would have maybe understood his humanity. Like, he's a man and he's been plagued by the world and they knew everything he'd been through. So I think they wanted to give him that space and respect. And I really appreciate that so much, you know, and so proud of my people for taking such good care of him. Yeah.
It sounds like you describe in your book that you had discussions with Michael, with Paris, with Prince, with about the folklore in Ireland, and you know Michael was pretty well versed in some of that. And you had some discussions around those books, and
I mean, you know, he was so knowledgeable about absolutely everything. You could bring up any topic, And he knew, I mean, obviously he'd read a lot of books about Ireland. He probably read a lot of books while in Ireland, about the folklore, the storytelling. He would talk about the pop culture, the music. He knew all about banshees, which are these like mythical creatures that we grew up hearing stories about in Ireland. And he was fascinated. Paris knew all about that too. So it's just the kind of thing that, you know, a little girl's imagination would latch onto for sure. And he loved Ireland for that. He loved it for its storytelling, culture, and folklore. He even could speak a few words of Gaelic. So there you go. One night in Vegas, he spoke French, German, and a couple of words of Gaelic. So
I think that's something a lot of people don't realize. Again, people see him as a showman, a performer, entertainer, but he never had a formal education, but he was so intelligent and just well informed. And when he was interested in something, he learned everything about it. And it's just amazing that you were able to see that firsthand, because that's really missing in a lot of accounts.
I mean, that's definitely something people have no idea, like how learned he was and how knowledgeable and what a bookworm he was. He just like read and read and read, as you guys well know, you know. So what an ode to him this book club is. It's so wonderful.
That's amazing. Did you see him read any specific books? We always want to know if you saw him any kind of book or in his house.
I don't remember. No, I don't remember a specific book. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
No, I don't remember that.
What are some words of wisdom Michael shared with you, or something that you learned from Michael that helped change your life?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything. Like I wrote in my book about how, you know, to inspire literally means to breathe in, and how I was just inhaling him from a very young age. Like I was just absorbing everything about him, all of the wisdom and the knowledge and the art and the beauty that he put out into the world. I feel like I was receiving it. And just like when you breathe in and the oxygen goes to every cell in your body, I feel like his inspiration and his influence like altered every cell in my body. You know, he is part of who I am. And it's interesting when I reflect on it now, you know, how for all those years I was inhaling him from when I was a little girl in the countryside to then seeing him in person and meeting him and getting to know him. I was just inhaling like all of this love and joy and inspiration and magic. And then when I wrote my book, it was like an exhalation of all of that and trying to put it all onto the page, you know, everything that he taught me, the way in which he shaped me, which I am sure I'm a better person than I would have been without him in my life, you know. And it's impossible to talk about the intricacies of how he affected me, because it's immeasurable. You know, it's everything. It's my whole life and my whole attitude to life. And I think it is the reason why I was able to make so many of my dreams come true. You know, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to live in LA, and I wanted to meet Michael Jackson. And you know, I think because he instilled that in me, that if you want something enough and you work hard and you can achieve it. And even if it's an impossible dream, like meeting Michael Jackson, I kind of put that same energy into that and thought I can work on it and, you know, go and travel and see him and put in that time and make those sacrifices. And so, yeah, everything. He shaped who I am.
Oh my gosh. Jessica and Helga just said that was so beautiful. How wonderful, inhaling him. I didn't know the root of the word inspiration, breathing him in. Oh my gosh, Talitha, you're too much. That was so well said. So well said.
Thank
and
you.
even though you were advised, you know, you're never going to meet him, he's a superstar. And he believed in manifestation and, you know, things like even before the book The Secret came out. It's about power of just, you know, just positive thinking. And we know all the books that he read too. And so that's inspiring. You met him. You more than met him. You were part of his life, like for 13 years. Right? A lot of it. Wow. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
You described that in Tokyo, you were able to accompany him to Disneyland, and on the Peter Pan's flight, you sat in a carriage behind him, and there was nothing. And so I'm just going to quote what you say in your book, that there was nothing childish about Michael, but childlike in the sense that he possessed a purity and innocence that most people lose. What do you think is most understood about him?
Misunderstood about him?
How about that?
Yeah, everything. I mean, I don't know why it's so hard for me to understand why people misunderstand him, because as a fan, and I'm sure we can all relate to this, we all see Michael and we see who he is. We see it instantly. So the fact that people don't see that, it's mystifying to me. I don't understand it. But I think this world is very harsh and it's very cynical, or at least it can be. And a lot of people are very cynical. And so they can't really accept that someone can be that good and can be that pure-hearted and can be that loving and caring and compassionate. And, you know, I'm sure we all care about the planet and we all care about children and animals, but Michael cared more. Michael cared deeper than most of us are even capable of. And I don't think that the world accepted that. And so they thought, someone who appears to be that good, there's got to be something sinister there. You know, there's got to be more to it because you can't be that good. So I think there was just a clash between the impurity of who he was and the purity of who he was and the impurity of this world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To show what does that tell us about the world, how cynical they are, and Michael, and that even though things, some things, pretty terrible things were said about him, he was still open to people to come to Neverland because that's who he was. And you experienced that, like his generosity and his open heart and his just, I'm sure he's told you things too about how he felt about, people and his continued. If you want to speak on that, we'd be more than happy to hear.
I mean, I quote in the book what he said about what he went through in the trial, and he didn't believe until then that people could be that evil. He thought it was just in the movies. So I mean, he talked about the trial only a few times with me, and I never brought it up because I never wanted to turn his attention to such a dark phase of his life. But he always emphasized his strength. You know, that famous saying, like he has rhinoceros skin. And he would say things to that effect, that he is so strong and he's going to go on and he's going to endure. But I know that I mean, obviously the trial was horrific for him and absolutely traumatizing. And one of the saddest things he ever said to me was in October 2008 in Las Vegas. And he said, "Sometimes I feel like I've lost faith in mankind." And when he said that, my heart broke. And I understood why he said it. And I understand, having had my own trauma now through losing him, I understand why he felt that way. But it was heartbreaking for me to hear, because he's what always gave me faith in mankind. I felt like if someone that good and pure could exist in this world, then it has to be a good place, right? It can't be all bad, So to hear him say that was very heartbreaking. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it's hard for people to believe that someone can be so pure-hearted. And, I'd like to believe that, first off, I think Michael set the standard for what a superstar is. He was literally the template for a widely known superstar. So a lot of the things that he endured, like he was kind of the first to do it and to have to go through it. I don't think the bullying that he endured, the criticism that he endured could ever happen today. And that's just my opinion, because I think so many celebrities now are so savvy. They're very private. I mean, look at Beyonce. She never does any interviews. That's one of the people I could maybe compare beyond that. Not even, she's not on that level, but she's very private, and she doesn't really reveal a lot of herself. She doesn't let a lot of people into her life either. And I think that because he was so open and so giving, he was taken advantage of. I think now in today's world, I think we have terms to describe people like Michael. We have highly sensitive person, HSP. We have empath. I don't think those words were really around back then. So we have a little bit more awareness, but I think that's what he was. And it's really sad. And I can understand why you never brought up those dark times in his life, because he didn't didn't want to live through that over and over again. So, but I'm glad you were there, and you were a light in his life. And whenever he saw you, I'm sure, it was nice for him. Okay, well, next question. So back to the kids. You described shopping with Michael and Paris on her birthday in Vegas, and you were witnessing people's reactions to Michael. You witnessed times that there would be, some comments made about Michael, and he would like react differently when that happened to him. Why do you think that was? It must have been hard when he was trying to like just have a good time with his kids, and people would have their little side comments. Why do you think he reacted in that way? And did he just ignore it and pretend it didn't happen? Like how?
Oh, no, when I talk about it in the book, he wasn't actually there when people were making these snide remarks. He wasn't there. So I never had an experience where I was there and he was too, and people said something that he heard. I'm sure that happened. It never happened around me. Thank God. I would have hated that. It would have been horrible. Yes. So I really can't speak to that your question exactly.
Yes. I think I guess what I'm trying to get at is these people would say these things in front of him, but then when they were actually around him, their whole demeanor would change. And they'd be like,
that I saw. Yeah.
He's so amazing. And whatever they said last week was out the window.
Oh, I mean, because I think it was just really trendy, popular to have this like cynical, condescending, disrespectful attitude towards him. I mean, I encountered that my entire life from when I was a child, like a teenager, all the way through adulthood. If people found out that I was a fan or that I knew him and had met him, a lot of times people would say something really nasty and really hurtful, almost like it was a joke to them. Like, I don't think they really intended to hurt me and I think some of it is that people couldn't grasp the humanity of Michael. Much like me as a little girl, I couldn't really grasp it, because he's so famous and he's such a megastar and he does have that magical aspect. But even meeting someone who knew him, they still couldn't grasp his humanity, which, that's a little more inexcusable. And they couldn't grasp the humanity of my relationship to him or my love of him, So I think that he was so objectified in the world, and that seeped into people's mindset, and they just treated him like a thing. I mean, it's really interesting what you just said about that wouldn't be accepted in this day and age. I've honestly never thought about that. I've never considered that, but you're right. You're right. It wouldn't be okay now. He was bullied. He was brutally bullied, overtly so, his entire life.
Yeah, and he's still bullied now because
he's still bullied now. Yeah, and why is it okay? It shouldn't be okay. It was never okay, but why is it okay now for anyone to say horrible things about him? Why? Because he's not here? I mean, people who love him are still here. It hurts all of us. And, I mean, the fact that he was bullied about having a skin disorder, like, how disgusting is that? Who would be okay with that? Now there are models with that, same loss of pigmentation, and there are superstars,
They're celebrated.
Yeah, they're celebrated, and rightly so. But like, how is it okay to make fun of him? Why was it always okay to make fun of him? I don't know. It wasn't. I mean, it wasn't, but people did, and it was horrible. It was awful living in that world,
Absolutely. And that's why I say, like, when anyone says anything bad about any celebrity today, they get on there, they become social justice warriors for themselves, and they get online, they're like, oh, this person said this about me, and then that person is canceled the next day. And it's just, that wasn't really happening with him. I don't even have answers to your questions. I don't know why it was okay to do that to him, and I think that's what's so frustrating to us still today as fans, because he was such a good role model. And there is no one like him today. He's a good, we already know that you think he was a good role model and father. And I guess, and you talk about this in your book, but I don't know if you can choose a favorite memory, but what's your favorite memory of him when you're just alone and your mind drifts to him? what's your favorite memory to return to?
Yeah, there's not really a favorite. I'm sorry. Like there's so many. And I got to a point because it was easy up to a certain point of me seeing him. It was so easy to pick a favorite because there was one that was really special and maybe I got to spend more time with him, or there were fewer of us. It was a bit more intimate. I remember like the time he introduced us to Elizabeth Taylor. It was really quick, but it was the fact like he introduced, like Michael Jackson introduced you to Elizabeth Taylor. Like how crazy is that? So that was really like cool and special. Or when he introduced us to his children. And then September 2003, spending a day with him at Neverland. Like that was obviously the most amazing experience up to that point. I mean, that's like every fan's dream, not only to being with Michael, being with him for a whole day inside Neverland, like whoa, it was mind blowing. But then in 2007, when I started to see him alone, like I can't pick one. I mean, maybe the one I think about the most, just for the fact that it was like what people think is law of attraction, which yeah, it probably was law of attraction and just like destiny meant to be, was the time I ran into him in Las Vegas. He'd moved there from Ireland. I didn't know where he was. I lived in LA. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go. It was a Friday. I was like, I'm just going to go to Vegas and see if I can find Michael. It's a needle in a haystack. Like anyone who knows Vegas knows it's vast. The Strip consists of all of these giant hotel casinos. Everyone has like 20 different entries and exit points, so many different restaurants, shows, casinos. He could be anywhere. And actually, what I found out later, I don't know if I knew it then, but sometimes he would go to those resorts and he would hide. So there were special rooms where I guess it's where people would watch gamblers to make sure they weren't cheating. I guess like he got into those rooms so he could see and he could watch people, but they couldn't see him. And he loved doing that. So he even went and like hid in the resorts. So what were the chances? And he would go everywhere on the Strip and like he was always being spotted here, there, and everywhere. What were the chances I would go to exactly the right place at exactly the right time? It was this fairly new resort called The Wynn. I'd been there maybe once. It was a complete maze. I got lost. I probably spent an hour looking for this restaurant where he'd been spotted one time. I was like, I'm just going to go there and see first. And by the time I get to the restaurant, there's no sign of him. I'm about to leave. I open a side door to leave. And there he is, all alone, looking like he just stepped out of a poster or a music video. He's like perfect, dressed in black. He's got his hair like curly. He's just like a dream. He's a vision. And I literally think it's a dream. I think I'm sleeping because I can't make it be real. It was the most surreal experience of my life. And it's one of my favorite because the chances of that happening were like 1 in a million. And yet it happened. And oh my God, it was a dream. It was an absolute dream.
Oh my goodness. You know what? Now that you now that you describe Vegas, for those of you who haven't been there, I've been there. It is a maze. The Strip is like, the hotels are connected. Like it's crazy. It makes sense now that he would enjoy Vegas. He always said that he liked Vegas, but now that you put it that way, it makes sense because he could kind of hide and kind of like go places inconspicuously. That makes total sense. Yeah. And I cannot believe you just happened to come across him. And I think we all need to appreciate that Talitha was a fan during the early era of the internet. Okay, so you didn't always have access to information. You may have gotten a little snippet here and there, maybe from a news article, maybe, but it had to be law of attraction because there's no way that you just open a door and he's just there. That's so crazy to me, but amazing and magical. Yeah. And that's, I guess it doesn't surprise me because that is usually how these encounters with Michael happen. It is often magical. And you mentioned his hair, which was curly that day. Now, this is perfect for the next question. Curls for my girls is something that a lot of us female fans love to say. I actually want a shirt for myself that says curls for my girls. You mentioned Irina had given him that shirt with that cute little saying, and he wore it to his last This Is It rehearsal. Who came up with that term? I always wondered where it came from. And how did you guys feel when you saw him wearing it? Was it like, did it make you giddy, or I don't know. This is me fangirling a little bit.
Yeah. Well, the phrase, I think that's all kudos to Irina. I think she came up with it. I mean, the day he stepped out, because he'd had his hair straight up until then, and the day he stepped, actually, when he rolled the window down, that's when we first saw he rolled the window down of his SUV, and we all looked in and just started squealing because he was wearing these curls, and he looked like 1992 Michael Jackson. Honestly, he could have just stepped out of that era. He looked like dangerous era Michael, and we all just lost our minds. It was a total fangirl moment for sure. I don't know if there were any guys there. I kind of feel bad for them if they were, because I'm sure we were all squealing a lot. And so she came up with that. Like, that was all her. I didn't know anything about the t-shirt until I saw Michael rehearsing. I didn't know it was hers, I don't think. Yeah, I saw him rehearsing on his last night with 2 other girls. And so maybe I knew it was hers. I'm not sure. I can't remember. But like, that was all her. And obviously, I mean, it's really special that he would wear that. I'm sure it's bittersweet for her, you know, because that was the last night of his life. But at the same time, it's really special that he would wear something that represents his connection to his fans, and that was given to him with that very much like pure fan love, you know, that was created with this pure fan love as well. So, and Irina's the sweetest person ever. She's so lovely. I just met her the first time in LA that year. She started going to see Michael that year.
Aww.
Yeah, she was.
And he called
so
you
lovely.
girls, right? Like, he would refer to you as his girls. Like,
yeah,
those are my girls. He saw you in Tokyo or wherever he goes.
Yeah, not in front of us.
No, but to other
so we
people.
thought it was really cheeky, actually, because it was Linda Parrish, who was a makeup artist, who was with him in Tokyo in March 2007. And so she told one of the girls I was staying with that, you know, just after he'd met us that day, he had turned to her and been like, "Oh, they're my girls. They, you know, they follow me all over the world. They don't have boyfriends or anything." Like, excuse me, don't we? How do you know we don't have boyfriends? I don't think we had any boyfriends between us, but that was kind of cheeky, you know. But yeah, he proclaimed us to be his girls. So of course we were thrilled. We were absolutely thrilled and loved it. And
I love that. That is such a fun story to share with us. I'm sure you guys enjoyed that. That's
yeah.
So, I mean, okay, and that blends right into that flows right into our next question, actually. So you were part of this sort of inner circle with other girls and other fans that were very close to him, that he recognized, you know, throughout those last few years and even before that. It's interesting because you were part of that inner circle and people knew you guys as the girls, his girls. His bodyguards recognized you, his staff, they recognized you as well. But things became different in those final years. And, you know, I know this is a little bit sensitive, so you can share what you want. But we as fans, we always had this sense that there were certain people in his life that were trying to keep his fans away, because his fans truly loved him and were truly looking out for him. And when they saw things that didn't feel right to them, they would try to tell him or communicate with him or call it out. For example, there's the time where the bodyguard was trying to grab those letters that you were trying to put in Michael's hands that last day. And I think that when I learned about that, it was very heart-wrenching for me, because I have a sense of what you were trying to say to him in those last days and what you were trying to communicate, and whether or not he got those messages. It's very upsetting, that story. Do you think that they were trying to be controlling towards Michael and who he had access to and what messages were being sent to him at that time?
Yeah, I do think that is the case. I mean, it's a story I tell in the book, how on May 29th, he invited a group of us into a studio and told us he wasn't happy with the tour. He wasn't happy with the schedule. And that was the first time he'd expressed anything like that to us. And it was very upsetting to hear. And at one point I'd spoken up and said, if you don't want to do all the concerts, just cancel them. You're the boss, basically. And that was the message we all emphasized after that. But two things are probably the reason we were shut out. One was, and this had never happened before, his words to us, which were in private inside a studio, somehow leaked into the media and ended up being reported in the tabloid, which of course made the tour organizers very nervous. I'm sure they didn't want any bad press around the tour, and hearing Michael wasn't happy with it was bad press for them. Also, the fact that he had the ear of these people we were untainted. We weren't paid to be there. Our best interest wasn't for the tour to go ahead. Our best interest was for Michael to be happy and healthy. That's what we cared about. And so there was a conflict of interest there. And I think we represented a threat to him. I honestly do, because we were telling him, you're the boss. This is your tour. If you don't want to do something, don't do it. It's not going ahead without you. So we were trying to give him back that sense of ownership that I felt at the time, and I feel even more strongly now. People around him were trying to take away from him. They were trying to make him feel like he needed them rather than the other way around. And he needed this tour or he was going to be bankrupt and homeless, basically, which was ridiculous. But I feel like they were preying on his vulnerabilities. And I think he was very vulnerable still because of the trial and all of the trauma he'd been through. I don't think he really had a grasp of how many people knew the truth and loved him and supported him. I mean, look at the ticket sales for This Is It. Like, that speaks volumes, But I don't think he really had a grasp on that. I think he felt really downtrodden, and they took advantage of that. And yeah, I do think they were controlling him in the sense that, maybe not in an overt way, but in subtle ways. And they were trying to control who was around him. And they were definitely trying to keep us away from him. I had less contact with Michael by far in those final weeks than I'd had for years. I could hardly get anywhere near him, I still reached him, but it was very brief. And the security was heightened. There were way more security guards. We had this brand new team of guards come in those final weeks, which, like, if they'd popped up in London a few weeks later, that would make perfect sense. London was going to be chaos. There were going to be way more people there. But at that point, it was still like the same group of fans around Michael that had been there all year, more or less. There were a few more maybe, but it wasn't chaos. And they acted like it was. And they were very heavy-handed. They would line up, like when you went back to Carlwood in the evening, they would line up on each side of the entryway and just try to hold us back. So we couldn't even get to the SUV. So Michael would be rolling down the window, calling us over. We wouldn't be able to reach him. So yeah, I definitely think they saw us as a threat and they were trying to keep us away, 100%.
That makes complete sense, but it's also just very hard to read and hard to think about. But thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and much has been made of the fact that Michael Amir was sitting in the back seat with Michael on his last night. And I haven't said this before, but my inkling is because he knew about the letters, and I know he knew about the letters because the one fan among us who wasn't really a fan told him that we were going to try to give those letters over. And I think he wanted to control the situation. And I think he wanted to make sure they didn't get into Michael's hands, which they did despite him. Now, whether they disappeared soon after or not, who knows? We'll never know,
Yeah, that's the unanswered question.
Yeah.
Do you think that AEG or somebody sort of talked to the guards to not let the fans directly communicate?
Yeah, I definitely think that. Yeah, I do.
Did you, in the book too, it made, it's like you fans knew something was going on, something different.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was very obvious. Yeah. You mean in terms of the security guards or? Well,
just Michael was different in the last.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It was very obvious that in those last days, that last week or so, he deteriorated very suddenly and dramatically from being apparently healthy, happy Michael to being very stressed out and unwell and unfit, quite frankly, to start a tour in 2 weeks' time with a grueling schedule at that, Yeah.
I know that was really distressing for you all to see so close up.
Yeah.
Thank God you were there, though, for him.
Thank you. I mean, yeah. Couldn't
Um,
prevent what happened, but
no.
we tried.
Do you think that Michael's the last years, though, it sounded like your book, you described that. Do you think they were happy ones? Like you seen before, obviously the last couple months, but did he talk to you about, you know, his travels and the last couple of years when he got back to the US and with the children, and it seemed a lot of happy times for him before that?
Yeah, I think so. I think he had a lot of happy times. I think he was obviously still traumatized by the trial, but you know, he was someone who really tried to focus on positivity and love and what was really important in life, you know, nature, and try to connect with that and try to connect with the healing energy in nature and in the planet. And you know, he was very cocooned with it. It was just him and his children for the most part. And I think he just tried to surround himself with love and things that inspired him. And so I believe that was his way of healing. And I'm sure it offered a reprieve to him. I do think like he definitely had happy times in those last year. And especially in 2008, that whole period in Vegas and I was around him in those final months he lived there, September and October. And it felt like a renewed Michael. It felt like a stronger Michael than I'd known the previous year. You know, it felt like he was healing and he was just really basking in his role as a dad. And that was, I mean, it was always his priority, but it was just his sole priority at that time, just being a father and having the joy and love of his children. So and also of the fans, honestly, like he was connecting with his fans in a big way during that period as well. So I think that you know, he had to work to be happy, though. I don't think it was easy for Michael to be happy in this world because of everything he'd been through and just because of the world being a dark place, you know, and having the darkness. And I think he felt that more than the rest of us do. So I always think he had to work hard to stay in a positive place, in a loving place, you know, yeah, and kind of cocoon himself from all of the trauma and all of the pain that was out there.
Right. So what do you, I just wanted to ask you, so just so you can describe, what do you think your group, his girls, the follower fans, like there's fans all over the world, we're all fans, but he recognized you everywhere he went. And what do you think, like there's, you know, people maybe misunderstand that, like when you followed him and you were there for him, what do you think it meant to him? Like it's like the book really describes it well and how important you were, like you were like extended family to him. You know?
Oh, that's what he said. Yeah, he did tell us we were his family. You know, I feel like the way that I was there as one individual and at times like feeling like I was there on behalf of so many fans who couldn't be, so that when I conveyed my love to him, I was conveying the love on behalf of so many others as well. And I know Michael has said in interviews that if possible, he would have loved to meet every single fan, to have them stand before him and speak to him and embrace them. And he would love to have had that experience. That wasn't physically possible, of course. But I think the way that I felt like, oh, I'm representing like other fans who can't be there, I think he probably felt the same way. And when he gave us love, he was giving it to all of the fans kind of through us, because he couldn't deliver his love in that way to them because they weren't there present. But, you know, it's like we were receiving that love on behalf of everyone. And I think what we represented was that fan love and that loyalty and people who saw who he really was. And when, you know, we were around him when he was out in public, I'm sure that we must have felt like a shield to him, because when Michael walked anywhere, like a mall or down the street, he never knew who was looking at him, seeing who he really was, and who was looking at him thinking the most horrible things. He never knew that. But when he looked at us, he just saw our loving, smiling faces and knew that we saw him for who he really was and that we loved him completely. And that must have been really comforting for him, I'm sure. And also, you know, Michael put himself out there in the world. He poured so much of his heart and soul into his art and his music. And I think also as an artist, like you want to have that received and then have someone come and tell you how they received that, how it changed their lives, how it inspired them. And again, it's not something that every fan got to do just because of the physical constraints of this world. You know, it wasn't possible. But for us who did get to do that, I think that was a very important role that we had to fulfill, and something he really appreciated. I know he did, because he would ask all the time, he would ask fans, like, how did you discover me? You know, tell me like your favorite songs, what they mean to me, what they mean to you. So he loved receiving that feedback. So I think we were a voice for that as well. You know, we were almost like, I always think of us as mirrors held up to him, and we reflected the light and the love that he put out into the world. We bounced that back to him, you know, and that was a gift, obviously, and a privilege to be able to do. But I do see that as our role in his world. And I imagine he did too. Of course, I can't speak for him, or, you know, I can't say for sure, but I imagine that that's what the experience was for him too, you know.
You know, I'm glad that you said that, because, you know, I think it would have been a shame if you never put the book out due to the bullying that you received from the fan community. I think that unfortunately there is a lot of competition and negativity in the fan community. People tend to say, oh, you know, this person was closer to Michael, so, you know, we're upset by that, instead of embracing that person and seeing that person as a representative of you, as someone who loved Michael in such a pure way, in the same way that they did. And I don't know why, you know, I think that we should do better as fans as far as embracing people who really had those unique experiences with Michael, because we don't want those stories to be lost. And it's a shame that you had to kind of not go into hiding, but you know, you didn't want to really be in the community because of the bad treatment you were receiving. I just think it's a shame, because we almost could have lost this account of your life. And yeah, you did represent us. And I think that we as fans should be more open and aware of that, instead of shunning those who got to have these cool experiences. So again,
Yeah, and I understand some people thought we were harassing him and an annoyance to him, and that's just how they perceived it. Of course, that's not how he perceived it, and that's not really how it was. But I can understand how it might seem that way on the surface. Like, I do joke with my friends, you know, obviously, like, what we did was nuts, and if we'd done that to anyone else, it would have been stalking. But this was Michael, and this was his world, and these were the rules that he set. And he encouraged us to come and sit at the gate of Neverland and be at his home. He wanted us to be there. You know, it made him happy. And obviously, for us to be able to make him happy was the best feeling in the world. And any fan would have done the same if they'd been in that position. You know, once he knew that. One of the girls who would come in, one of the LA girls who would come in 2009, she had never met him before, and she really wanted to. And she thought, you know, I'm sure he doesn't want fans around. It's annoying to him, and he wants his privacy. So I'm just going to go once. And like, I'm going to go until I meet him, and then that's it. I'm done. She ended up coming as much as we did, because she realized like that wasn't the case. As soon as she started coming and meeting him, she realized how much he wanted us to be there. And so she came as often as she could from then on, you know. And so it's one thing to judge the situation from afar, and the reality of it was actually very different. I mean, it was an exchange. Like, I'm not going to say it was purely selfless. Of course it wasn't. I wanted to be there. I wanted to be around Michael. He was intoxicating. He was addictive. His energy was just so magical and pure. And I mean, nothing felt better than being around him, than speaking with him, than being held by him. So I'm not going to pretend it wasn't selfless, but it also gave him something. You know, I think like we both benefited, you know, because that's what he would say. And he would say, when I come out and I put the windows down, I want to feel that love, and I want my children to feel that love, because that's what it's all about. So we were both feeding on that relationship, on that dynamic. You know, it fed both of our souls. It was an exchange. because I would give love and he would give love in return, and it was a giving and receiving, and it was always like that. And of course, there were times when you were there more for him than yourself, like the trial. It wasn't about meeting Michael. It was about being there for him 100%. But mostly it was just this exchange back and forth, back and forth.
I think the exchange, I think that's a really good point. And I think we should also remember that Michael was not a normal or typical person. So his relationships and his connections to people were not typical or normal in the sense of, an average person's relationships. People always kind of scoffed at his relationship with Elizabeth Taylor and his young friends, but he just wasn't an average or typical person. So people misinterpret those things from the surface, but I think your story is just a good explanation of why he was like that.
Yeah, I mean, everybody around him was either paid, like his security or his staff or his managers, or then there's people that wanted something from him, and you were just giving love to him. That's it. That's, and receiving love from him. But it was purely love. That's it.
Yeah.
So it's understandable. Or as friends with, the people that were former child stars, like the Elizabeth Taylor and the child stars, that it's just about love. They don't want anything from him. So that's
exactly. There was no ulterior motive. And, I've seen fans attacked for like wanting a picture with him. Oh my God. Like the most any fan wanted was a hug or a picture or an autograph or to spend some time with him, versus the people who were, wanting to use him to further his career, to take from him, to get his money, whatever it was. Like even with fans who wanted something, it was so innocent. And he definitely didn't mind giving it. And also, I feel like you have to give fans some credit. Like we would never have wanted to be anywhere he didn't want us to be. We would have been mortified to be somewhere he didn't want to be. That was the last thing any fans wanted. And I think any prolific follower probably has a story of when, well, I knew where he was and I could have gone, but it didn't feel right, so I didn't do it. And for me, that time was in 2007 when he was staying at the Green Valley Ranch Hotel just south of Las Vegas. And I had this magical encounter with him. He came and found me in a parking lot, and it was so magical. I could have gone back the next day and the day after that and the day after that. But it was like, no, I'm not, like, I'm done, because, this feels really private. I'm not going to go there. Like, I would not do that, because it was super, low key. It was him, his 3 children, and this bodyguard bill. And that was it, as far as I could see anyway. So I had no intention of going back. Like, and any follower will tell you situations like that where, maybe they went and it just didn't feel right. It felt like he wanted to be private. When he did the Sony protest in New York in the summer of 2002, he stayed privately. Normally he would stay in either the Palace or the Four Seasons in Manhattan. But at that time he stayed at a different hotel. I think it was a little outside the city. I wasn't on that trip, but my friends were, and they found out where he was, and they went there, and the bodyguard said, listen, he's actually like trying to stay off the radar. He was afraid for his life during that time. He was wearing a bulletproof vest. And they're like, he doesn't want fans around. They're like, no problem. And they left. And so, we were really respectful. And you'd have to be kind of insane to love someone that much and then be somewhere where they won't want you to be. Like, why would you want to do that? So I feel like you have to give fans some credit too, that we would feel out a situation, and if it didn't feel right, we would leave,
When you were respectful towards that, and he brought you in, I'm sure, because you said that in your book, it talks about some fans that were kind of like knocking on his door or banging on his windows, and that sort of. He never did that, and he probably would. Life.
And most fans didn't. It wasn't like that. I think it's what you see when you see these documentaries, and they love that kind of like. It could get hysterical, like at concerts, we were all going crazy, and when it was appropriate, we'd go crazy. But when we were with them, I did hear of one fan who would like break into Neverland. I don't think she was really a fan, though. She was just someone with issues and would, but like a fan's not going to do that. No, of course not, But I think people looking from afar maybe thought that we did that kind of stuff, or that, we would intrude or be very pushy. And it wasn't like, it was actually really gentle. And we would go so far, and then it was up to him to kind of pull us the rest of the way. And if he didn't have time to see us, that was fine. And if he did, hey, it was magic, heaven on earth.
So Stephanie, do you want to do some fan questions or member questions, I should say, that we gathered yesterday? Do you want to start with that?
Yeah, we can go right into that.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a good one from Tasha Bell Steinlag. I'm also curious about this as well. So when in your interactions with Michael, some of us had this perception that he was like shy and maybe soft-spoken, and when you talked to him, you guys had conversations, was he kind of like shy and reserved, or was he like really talkative? What was he like, I guess?
Yeah, I think like anyone, he was in different moods at different times. And sometimes he was always very soft-spoken and gentle, and very affectionate. But sometimes he could be more boisterous or animated. It also depended maybe how many people were there, if there were a large number of people, or if there were faces he didn't recognize. That would probably make him feel shyer. Certainly if there was media, if there was paparazzi, he felt really shy. And if someone said he was beautiful, I stopped saying he was beautiful, even though I always thought it, because it made him self-conscious and it made him shy. Anytime anyone said, I know, and he was the most beautiful man in the world to ever live. But, I think he was self-conscious, so that would make him shy. But, sometimes, like, I remember this one time I was alone with him and the kids, and he started ranting about, like, racism, and he started cursing, and I was like, oh my God, Michael's cursing. And I felt like so flattered, because I was like, he's not even thinking that like she's a fan, or that, he has to put on an act. And I don't think he ever did put on an act, but like he was just like being Michael and just like expressing himself. So he was all kinds of everything, like all of us are, and on different days being a little different. But I think he wasn't shy with me. I don't know why, but he wasn't shy with me. I'm probably the least intimidating person in the world. Maybe that helps. And obviously I adored him, and everything he said was perfection, and everything he did was perfection. And
no, it's because
I think he felt that.
It's because you were genuine. I think that's why he opened up to you. Yeah.
Yeah. We have another question from Megan Stirl. I've always thought on video, Michael is genuine and true to himself. Was he just like the footage you watched of him before you met, always humble? Okay, I guess it's basically the same in what you're talking
kind of similar, yeah.
Yeah, always humble. Yes, always so humble. Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, it was, you would forget that you were with Michael Jackson, because it was just Michael, and he was so unassuming, and like I said, so soft-spoken. And then sometimes like I would spend time with him and then go home and watch a video, and it was like mind-blowing. It was difficult to correlate, this was the same human being. Like he definitely did not have the presence of like what you would expect a superstar to have. You'd expect them to be a little superior, I guess. And honestly, he made you feel like you were the most important person in the world when you were with him, that everything you said was important, rather than the other way around, which was the case. It was his words that were important, but he made you feel like really special. I think that's just a gift that he had.
Yet he was intoxicating as well. Yeah, I think that's such an interesting balance of how he presented himself. Here's a question from Al Shaima. Did you ever, you mentioned he was very well read and very well informed. Did you ever talk to him about other topics, philosophy, science, current events, life, religion? What was he like in that regard?
I mean, very knowledgeable and wise. He talked a lot about energy, and us all being spirit beings and our energy beings, and having more capability than we even realize, and being so much more than we are. He talked about religion. He talked about the Bible, and he'd read the Bible, and he said, I don't care what religion you are, but Jesus was a great prophet. He said, I understand his message. And then, of course, he had to say, because there was a few fans, I'm not saying I'm Jesus, because, he's so used to, if there were like, it was only fans, we would never misinterpret that, but he's so used to having to explain that, like, So that was funny that he felt like he needed to explain that, which obviously he wasn't saying that, but
Right.
yeah, we talked about, I mean, all kinds of things over so many years. I remember him telling me about the author L. Frank Baum, because we would talk about writing because I'm a writer, so I love talking about that to him and about expression and creativity and art. And he told me that L. Frank Baum was out playing with his children one day, and he had this like moment of inspiration, and he ran inside and he basically wrote the entire plot for The Wizard of Oz. It just came to him in a moment, which I love that story. I love that Michael told me that story because I find it so inspiring. You know, I hope I have that moment one day. I'd love to write a beautiful story like that, you know.
That's really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so there's part of another. Yeah, so this is kind of blending into these questions here. There was, you know, how would you feel when you're in his aura? It's part of the previous question. And also, yeah, like what it felt like to be we've heard before in interviews, I think it was Bill, he said that when he enters a room or any sort of vicinity that he changes molecules. People believe that his aura and the feeling when they had around him. Can you describe that at all? Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he had such a strong sense of presence. I mean, he's probably the only human who ever lived who was as powerful in his aura and in his energy as he was in his physicality. Like both things were equally present when you're around him, and you're not normally like necessarily that aware of somebody's energy. But with Michael's, it was almost palpable. It was almost like a physical thing. And everyone would talk about it, not just like fangirls or like the more sentimental types or, you know, people who are into that stuff. It's like everyone would remark on this, how when you enter the room, I remember where he entered the room the most was the courtroom, honestly. Like it was, you know, 5 days a week, week after week, he would enter the courtroom, and it was just this wave of energy and presence. And when you were in that energy and in a more positive setting, when you were in that energy field and talking to him, and especially when you were being held by him, you felt like your energy was elevating at a higher vibration. Wow. You really felt like uplifted. I remember when I would see later in years, when I would see pictures of me in his arms, I was always a little surprised that my feet were planted on the ground because it felt like I was floating.
Well, that answers that answers Anya's question of what did it feel like hugging him. That is the most intense description I've heard.
Oh, thank you.
That was wow.
Yeah. And it was the most intense experience of him to be held by him. I think that was the ultimate experience of his energy. I mean, I feel like we're all connected to something higher. I think Michael was more connected to it. And so he connected us to that, like call it heaven, God, creation, nature, whatever you want to call that. He was connected to this higher level. He had more of that in him. And so when we were around him, we got to feel heaven. Mm-hmm. We got to feel pure love and pure energy.
Wow. I think that's the most consistent thing that we hear from anyone who's ever encountered him. And I think, like you said, we all have special gifts that God or whoever you believe in gives us. And I really think that was one of his gifts to humanity. You know, you talked about the law of attraction. That's come up a number of times while we've been talking to you. And I know he did believe in the book, The Secret, and about manifesting your dreams. That was certainly a part of his work ethic and just the way he lived his life. And I wonder if, you know, did any of that rub off on you? Were you aware of a lot of those spiritual teachings back when you were that age, when he would talk to you about it?
Yeah, I was when I was older, but I mean, when I was younger, I wasn't really aware of it, but I think I was absorbing it, like I talked about earlier, just absorbing him. So by the time The Secret came out, I had been practicing its tenets for years, not knowing what it meant. I'd never heard of the law of attraction. somehow I think I received that from Michael. I think that was in his teachings and in his message. And one of my favorite things that he ever created was the book Dancing the Dream. Again, as a writer, I appreciate it so much. And I read that repeatedly over and over and over and just absorbed all the messages in there. And I think that's in there, that idea, and that, you know, we can make things happen, but you have to work with them too. You can't just imagine them or write them down. You need to also, like, it's about focusing your energy and also what you actually do and to bring them about.
That's the thing. I think Michael had been practicing that all of his life. It's only now that law of attraction and manifesting, all of that is so mainstream now, but he was literally doing that way before. And I think that's another way that he is very misunderstood, because he was just ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Ahead of his time with so many things that are now just so commonplace now.
Yeah, exactly. I remember visiting Encino once and being told about all of the messages he would have on the walls to himself, things that he wanted to achieve, and on the mirrors in his bathroom. And he had this like little secret tunnel where he would go, and just like everywhere they were plastered. And that was visualization, you know, that was exactly the law of attraction. Mm-hmm. But he put in the work as well.
Worked very hard. Yeah.
Worked very hard. Yeah.
I put out a picture yesterday, and I was of you and Michael, one of your pictures. It's this one. See this one?
Oh yeah, I love that one. Everyone loves that one, I think.
So the question for this question was, like, she's referencing to this picture. She said it's by Tessa Toplovec. Mm-hmm. She says, here in the picture, do you smell Bala Versailles or do you smell Black Orchid when he was hugging you?
I think it was Black Orchid I smelled most of the time. You know, I don't have the most sensitive nose, so I wish I could answer better when people ask me about his smell. All I can say is, like, he smelled really good. But I know in later years, sometimes I would get a whiff of a perfume and it would turn out to be Black Orchid, and like I would just get heady because it smelled like Michael to me. Oh. So I think Black Orchid was the one he was wearing, or the one that my nose picked up on it, at least.
This picture, was this the one, I think you said that was Michael's favorite picture?
Yeah. Yeah. He told me that once. That was his favorite.
Oh, yeah. It looks like your hugs were just like the best hugger.
He gave real hugs.
Yes, he did. And he would put his hand on your hair and like pull you even closer.
Closer for everybody. I don't know if anybody can see that, but that's one.
And to think people say he's a germaphobe. You know, like he was afraid of people and all of this crazy stuff.
Yeah,
a mess.
Ridiculous.
Here's a question from Malibu Jenny. She said, I would love to know if you ever met his kids again, or if they remember you. Do they recognize your face? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, I did see them a few times in the immediate years afterwards, and they definitely recognized me. I mean, it would have been weird if they didn't, because we spent a lot of time together. But would they know me now? I don't know. You know, it doesn't seem like a long time ago to me, but they were super young. I mean, they've gone through so much since then. They've gone from being children into adults. Oh, I don't think Blanket ever knew who I was. You know, he was still in his own little world when I knew him. You know, we didn't have so much interaction because he was so shy and quiet. But with Prince in Paris, it definitely had a nice connection. Yeah. So would they know me now? I don't know, honestly.
It's been a while. Birthday today.
Oh yeah, that's right. Happy birthday, Paris.
We were just like, oh wow, that's interesting that it's birthday. Okay, so again, I think this touches another question by Dolly Rodriguez. They're talking about his aura around him. She said that she had met a person who worked with Michael, Vincent Patterson. They spent the weekend talking about Michael, and she wanted to confirm what he said, that, you know, when he was around Michael, he got goosebumps and he felt an incredible peace around him. That's another aura question.
Yeah.
You know, it's so funny because there was always so much chaos happening around him. And I remember, oh gosh, the name is escaping me. The director of Thriller, oh, I can't remember his name, but there's a story that same as Dolly's, where they're in Disneyland and the crowd is surrounding them. They're shaking the car. They escaped into a car. They're shaking the car, and Michael's just like, "Oh yeah, yeah. So what'd you have for lunch?" And he's just like, "What is that?"
Yeah, that it just inner sense of presence, I guess. And I guess he was used to it too. And, he felt safe because he was inside, I imagine. But no, he did have a very soothing presence. One of the stories I tell in the book is about those few occasions when I knew I was going to meet him. Because normally I would just be waiting, hanging out, whether at Neverland, a hotel, his house. So I didn't know I was going to see him until the moment like it was almost happening. There'd be an indication, like the SUV would pull up, or the bodyguards would come out, or the gates would start to open. So you had those few seconds of like, here he comes. But I had some private visits in 2009. And in the first of those, I was like, we were taken into a hotel suite. It was my friend, and I refer to him in the book as Robert, a guy from England, lovely guy. And so we were taken into a hotel suite and told, okay, Michael will be here in a minute. And we waited there for about 5 minutes. And my heart was beating like so fast because I was so nervous. I mean, I was still nervous, it was still part of me that was just like the 13-year-old girl every time, like experiencing Michael and just being like, I never lost that. So I was really, really, really nervous waiting for him. And then as soon as he stepped into the room, it was just like, peace, tranquility. I just felt like completely present. I wasn't nervous anymore. I was just there. I was just being. And so, yeah, I think he had that for sure.
Amazing.
He had that effect on people.
It's crazy because this flows right into Imala's question. And this is something that I've never been able to wrap my mind around with Michael. Even with that, even him seeing his effect on other people, his fans, and even non-fans, how they would just melt. It always shocks me that he never was really fully aware of his influence on everyone. He was always so humble, and you touched on this earlier. Despite all the things that happened to him, the terrible things that happened to him, he still had these doubts that people loved him and that they were still playing his music. If he brought it up, and I think Bill Whitfield said this too, he was surprised that people were still playing his music. And people would say, Michael, no one ever stopped playing your music. Do you really think he was really fully aware of the influences that he had on so many of us around the world?
No, I don't think he was. I think first there was his humility, but also it's impossible to grasp that. How does one human being grasp the enormity and the expansiveness of that reach and of that influence? I don't think anyone could, and he certainly couldn't. And when we would tell him the most inane thing of a song we loved, or how it affected us, how it made us feel, what we thought of it, like what we had questions about some of his lyrics, and he received that like it was so precious to him. But it's like everyone feels that, like millions of people have that same experience or have that same story. So he should have been taking it for granted, but he wasn't. He felt like that was so precious. And I think maybe he thought that was rare. And we would always try to tell him, like, we're just like the 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 12 people who make it to you. But like, we're here as part of a group of millions of people who feel this way and who have received you this way and whose life you've altered in a positive and immeasurable way. We always try to drone that message home. But I understand why he just couldn't grasp it, with just, again, the humility of who he was, the enormity of it. Like I said before, sometimes I would spend time with them and like I would forget that it was Michael Jackson, and I would forget that it's the same person who gets on stage and a stadium full of 120,000 people basically faints, like loses their minds or whatever. So
Yeah.
it was difficult to hold on to those two almost contradictions. It felt like contradictions, like
I think you, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think you described it perfectly. I think you again hit the nail on the head because I hear a lot of accounts like that. Like he'd just be like, "Oh wow, did you really like my song? Wow, thank you." And like in my mind, I'm screaming, "Actually, you literally changed my life. You literally changed my whole outlook on life and who I am as a person. You shaped who I am, literally. Like it's more than just a song." And yeah, I can see how that would be hard to really take in. It's a lot overwhelming.
Yeah.
And his mother
Exactly.
didn't she always say, don't let he didn't want to get a fat head, he'd refer to it as.
Yeah, but he was too much the opposite of that. It's like you could at least know who you are, and the fact that his children didn't know who he was, so he wasn't around people within his inner circle like every single day, seeing him as the superstar. Because he kept that from his kids as well, and it was only during the time I knew them that they were even beginning to grasp the enormity of his presence and his influence as a musician.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you heard Paris has an album out? Have you heard it? It's
yeah, I haven't heard it. But
great. I felt like I was floating in a bubble. Like
wow.
Music was really, I don't know, it just got that something about it.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess there's another question here from Megan Styrel. So what was it like when you went to the This Is It rehearsals with Michael? Was he normal self or did he seem different when he was in work mode? Was there a difference of the work mode versus?
Oh, I didn't go to rehearsals with him. I mean, I went to see them in the studio one time at Center Staging, but it was just in a private little room. So he wasn't working at that time. So I can't really speak to that. And then I would hear the rehearsals, and I saw a rehearsal on the last night, just a little bit of a performance. But so I wasn't really privy to seeing him. He wanted to keep that secret. He wanted to be a surprise on opening night. So he was trying to keep it secret from us, but we still picked up on little bits here and there. I mean, he asked us all for a list of songs, really early on in the whole process. He asked us to all come together and put together a list of what songs we wanted him to perform. And he based his set list around what we chose, which is crazy. It's crazy. I mean, he gave us so much influence on him, he just, it's mind blowing, really.
Oh, I can't imagine.
I mean, who else does that? Who else wants their fans to be a part of their conception of their next tour?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you put it that way, yeah, it really puts it into perspective.
Yeah.
So we have a couple more. Al Shima said, I think you already answered this about This Is It. Do you think it was his choice or was he forced to do it? So we'll skip that. But Dwayne Reeder said, and he did involve you in a lot of his choices, like you just mentioned, but I don't really know if he talked to you a lot about the business side of things or if he ever mentioned it in passing. But this question from Dwayne is, did Michael ever mention working with John Branca, and Frank Deleo ever again? Did you ever hear about people he worked with directly or no?
Just Frank, but only because when I went to see him in that Center Staging during This Is It rehearsals, Frank was there. And so my friend and we stopped and said hi. My friend actually got a picture with him. And then Frank joked oh, I have the odd fan or two as well. And everyone laughed. But so when we walked into the room next to where that happened, Michael had been watching because it had one of those one-way mirrors, so you can see out but no one can see in. So he had seen that interaction. So then he was like, oh, you know, Frank, you remember him? We're like, yeah. Again, like he was always so surprised about that. Stuff like that. Like, oh my God, like Frank Deleo, obviously we know who he is. He's legendary. So well, that was surprising to him.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Oh my,
I know. But beyond that, like, no, honestly, you know, that was just the one mention of him. I'm sure I could have asked. I wasn't really that interested.
Right?
You know,
I can understand that.
in his business stuff, you know.
Yeah.
I think we touched on this one too. There was, it's a question from Imola Toth. Do you remember any of the things Michael told you as a takeaway for you for the life that still has an effect on your everyday life? Sorry.
No, that's a good question. You know, there's one thing he wrote in a letter to me. He wrote to always have peace of mind and peace of heart. And at the time, I don't think that meant as much to me. I know it didn't mean as much to me as it did later on, because when I lost him, I lost the sense of peace inside. You know, I went through very dark times for many years. It was bewildering, and you know, I suffered a lot. So that line from that letter, it really sank into me later on, and it's something I think I'm still searching for, to the extent that I had it while he was here. Peace of mind and peace of heart. Like now I realize how valuable that is, and how it's not something to be taken for granted. And also it's probably something he had to work on, also on achieving inner peace, you know, with everything he'd been through, and, you know, living in this world and having those lies still out there about him. So that's one thing that definitely, it stuck with me, and it became more meaningful as time went on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, of course, he had a huge influence on your life. Of course.
Yeah. As discussed.
Here's a question from Gail. What's one thing you regret not saying or doing when it comes to Michael? Was there ever a time where you met him, maybe it was like a quick little interaction, and you had wished that you had said something to him and then you forgot, or you wish that you could have gone back and redone something different or said something differently to him?
Not really, because even if I forgot in the moment, then there's always a next time, you know? So I think in the end, I got to really share everything I ever wanted to share with him in one way or another. There was one question I never asked him, and I'm mad that I never did, and I don't know why I didn't. Why he used to sign 1998 under his autograph. Do you remember that?
I've seen it.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Like, wait, and then he stopped. But he used to for a long time, as I was, you know, kind of coming of age. Like, I would often see that, and I often would think, I wonder why he does that. And I never asked him, so I still wonder why he did that.
I'm going to keep my eye on the comments to see if any of the fans watching know or have an answer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing. You know, regret on another. It's a funny thing for me to consider in relation to everything. Obviously, I regret that I can't go back in time and change the outcome. I regret that I couldn't do things differently. I mean, I regret that I can't go back with the knowledge that I have now and prevent what happened. You know, but that's like the reason I can live with myself, is that I know at the time everything I did during those final days was with pure intention of just helping Michael. Like, it definitely wasn't about meeting Michael, seeing Michael. It was just about helping him. And I can absolutely say the same was true for everyone around me, all the fans who were there. We all put Michael first when it mattered the most. So I don't regret that, of course, you know, but I regret that we couldn't change the outcome. We couldn't prevent what happened.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you think he read that letter? Do you know? Well, you don't know. But
I don't know. I'll never know.
Yeah.
I'll never know for sure. You know, some people say yes. Oh, they were in his car. They were in his room. I mean, we've never seen them again, though. I wonder where they are. If someone has them, or if someone found them and destroyed them. If someone took them away because they didn't want him to read them. I don't know.
Yeah.
So here's a theory on 1998 from Alba. Paris was born in 98? Gail, maybe it was a goal that he achieved or something that he achieved. Oh, Harrison Funk apparently knows, but promised he would never tell.
Oh, that's so annoying. I understand, but like, oh, I want to know.
Oh, that's funny.
One question. Maybe we could take some from the live stream, but we got a question here from Jessie Lira. Again, it's tough and it's touching on other questions, but just to read it out. So, your fondest memory with Michael. What do you remember the most about Michael? And maybe what would you want the world to know about Michael? What were your
everything? There's this scene in a movie. It's called A Green Mile. It's based on a Stephen King novel, and it's about this guy who's wrongly convicted of murder, and he's in prison. He's on death row, and this prison warden becomes friends with him, and he knows he's innocent, or suspects that he's innocent. And so this guy is really gifted. This convicted innocent man is very gifted. And in one scene, he puts his hands on the warden, and he telepathically communicates what really happened, to do with the crime he's accused of. And so the prison warden receives everything that this guy experienced, receives it fully, the emotion of it, the truth of it. I wish I could do that to the whole world. Wow. I wish I could do that. I wish I could share the fullness of my experience of Michael. And I wish everybody could. I wish everybody who encountered him, who spent time with him, who knew him, who were his friend, who were his family member, is including and especially the people who've lied about him. I wish they could convey the truth so people could see the contradiction between the truth of what they experienced of Michael and the lies that they tell. So it's everything. I wish the world could know everything about exactly who he really was.
Oh my goodness. There are people in the comments right now that say, oh my gosh, you speak so well. It's true because, you have a real way with words.
Oh, thank you.
That scene from The Green Mile. Wow. I got goosebumps as you were describing it because and we always say this in the book club, we think that Michael is such on a different level, a different plane of existence, that it might take 100 years for people to really understand his impact and his influence, and for his name to be cleared of everything. And it would be much easier, though, if we could just telepathically tell everyone who his true nature. If only it were that easy, right?
I know. So, we write books, we tell our stories, we tell our friends, we tell our families, and we hope that somehow that message gets out there. And we do interviews like this because you never know. It's probably mostly fans who already know the truth who watch, but you never know who your message can reach. So
absolutely.
It sounds like the mockumentary that came out a couple of years ago, a lot of people started investigating and changed their minds about him through that. And I think if you read, if they would put 2 hours into investigating, they're going to have a different opinion.
Yeah.
People would just read a book, read one book before you comment.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah. It really astounds me that we're in when that came out, it was 2019, but we're in 2021. There are resources at our fingertips. It's not acceptable for us to just accept a one-sided documentary. And that's why it kind of shocks me that people took it at face value, because we're smarter now in 2020, 2021. We dig, and we have the internet now. We have these resources at our disposal and at our fingertips to triple check these stories and these allegations. But in the case of Michael, it's so different because he's been part of the cultural memory for the last 50 years. And people grew up with that, and they just sort of took that in as the truth and that was before the internet. So it's a very difficult situation we're in as fans, and trying to share the truth, because a lot of people are very set in their ways when it comes to him. But
Yeah. And I
I,
think
mhm,
there's a lot of social and public pressure as well to quote unquote believe the victim, which, okay, believe the victim, but in a case where someone is falsely accused, they're the victim.
mhm,
Michael's the victim here. So you can't just assume that any allegation is true. You have to, and honestly, it's like you said, it takes minor investigation to see what's really behind this. It very quickly falls apart. So it's not some mastermind conspiracy. The contradictions are very obvious. The things that don't make sense, the motive behind this, it's all very clear. But people don't even do that minimal amount of research, unfortunately. They just jump on the bandwagon and believe
but
what
only
they're trying to
only
believe.
for him. But only for him.
I know.
Because there's
I
no
know.
defend him now. He's, that's the problem. I mean, he's deceased. There are no protections. No protection.
Yeah. Yeah.
This would not be happening.
Yes.
We would go to trial, like you saw. You
Yeah.
were there, and
Yeah.
in the book you talk about, and as well, I'm going to say, in the book you talk about how, well, obviously what was the defense side was never reported, and we actually had Aphrodite Jones on one time, and she had said that she went in there full thinking he was guilty, and she went in there, and then she realized, that this was all bogus. So she wrote a book, Michael Jackson Conspiracy, which is amazing. And she was not a fan, and she even mentions about being around him, like his aura and all that stuff too, and whatever. So even a non-fan, like it's pretty obvious, but media slant that you that you in your book you talk about I think some journalists there was saying they weren't interested in reporting the defense, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was a British tabloid. So that's pretty typical, but yeah, I know. And so same thing with a local I met during the trial, just a regular guy. And he told me initially he had thought 99% sure Michael's guilty because no smoke without fire, right? And then he decided to go along, and he went in the public lottery, and he would win tickets sometimes and go inside. And very quickly, the 99% started to reduce, and the 1% that he was, his initial belief that he was innocent started to increase. And by the time I met him, he was 99% sure Michael was innocent, and that the DA was just out to get him. It was like a personal vendetta. And that was just simply from sitting inside the courtroom whenever he won entry through the public lottery. So, that just shows the disparity between what was actually happening inside the courtroom and what was being reported to the world. There was no correlation there. It was a complete contradiction because people were sitting at home, regular people watching what was happening, thought it looked really bad for Michael because that was the narrative that was being presented to them. That was the lie that was being presented to them. It was so far from the truth.
Absolutely. And, and just as an aside, there are a lot of, I've been watching the comments come in as you've been speaking. And, I have to say, I have to be honest that there are a lot of people out here that took a chance watching your interview. There were people that prejudged you and your story, sadly. Whatever it was, jealousy, I don't know. But a lot of them are saying now, wow, Talitha is so genuine. She's such a lovely person. I'm glad I took the time to listen to this interview. I'm so glad I took the time to read her book and I gave it a chance because she was someone that should have been around Michael. And I'm glad that she was around Michael. And so I think that as fans, we have to really not be hypocritical. If there is a fan out there that has had a unique experience with Michael, we need to embrace that. And we need to take that in and learn from what they experienced so that we can add to the stories and the truth of Michael and his life. Because we know that Michael was not given that privilege by the media. We know that people didn't take him and try to understand him as a full human being. So I think when these stories come out, and there have been more and more coming out as the years have gone by, we need to be open-minded about it, everyone. And we need to just try and embrace the people who are coming out and telling these stories because they don't need to. They don't have to. And it's actually a gift to us. So we should really be more appreciative.
Yeah, and a gift to generations to follow. Like when we're gone, that's the biggest thing, is when your story, thank God, it's in print and it's going to be there. You know, you have a book there and people can read it, and there's nobody around anymore that was involved with Michael to tell their stories. That's what's important.
Yeah, and I just want to thank everyone. Thank you guys for having me on, and thank you to everyone who's commented. And I'm not wrapping it up. I need to say this in case we suddenly finish. But thank you for everyone who, your lovely comments. I'm going to read them afterwards. Everyone who's reached out on social media and been so kind and shared your experiences of Michael with me. I feel very touched. Thank you for opening up to me. I cherish every single person's story. It's made me feel even more grateful because I'm hearing from so many younger fans who weren't around, weren't old enough at that time to follow Michael and have their own experiences. And my heart goes out to them so much. Hearing from other followers, I've had people tell me that my book makes them feel closer to Michael. That means so much to me. Or that it's helped them to heal. That's meant so much. Followers telling me, they're glad I've told my story because otherwise it would die with us. And not to be morbid, but if we don't tell our stories now, once we're gone, they're gone. So I've also heard from followers who have told me they're going to write their stories now, maybe not to publish, but at least to share with their families and their friends. And I just think that's a really beautiful thing. And also, if people want to keep their stories private and just between them and Michael, there's beauty in that too. So everyone just do what's in your heart. But if you want to tell your story and you do want to publish it, don't be held back by fear like I was for a long time, because there's nothing to be afraid of. Fans will embrace you. They've embraced me. And I think it's important to tell these stories if that's, like I said, in your heart to do. Then I would encourage anyone to do it. And I'll help in any way I can. I'd love to help someone else along their journey.
Yeah, we would read them. That's for sure.
Yeah, me too.
People haven't read your book, wow, for people who haven't been able to meet him or go to those concerts, if we're in North America here and this wasn't as whatever, we didn't have the opportunity, but wow, just the excitement of your book brings you through. I can feel it, the anticipation of waiting and the adventure of following him or in that world. It was just wow, I wish I was, if I would have saw one concert, I would have been with you.
Yeah. And there was so much pressure to get to the front and you don't want anything to go wrong, and I know it was hard for Americans. There are fans my age who never saw him in concert because when they became of age, he wasn't performing over here anymore. So maybe they saw him at Madison Square Gardens, but not actually on tour. And so also, I talk about those early moments. And if you read my whole book, you might think my most amazing experiences were later on when I was with him. And that's true to some extent, when I was spending time with him. But those first moments, just seeing him live in person, getting his attention for the first time, being recognized by him for the first time, they were equally exciting and mind-blowing, because up to that point, he had been this fantasy figure on my bedroom wall, or on the TV screen. And to just be in front of him and especially to be recognized by him, it was amazing. Those moments were so precious as well. So it's nice to be able to share that experience with people who weren't able to do that.
Mm-hmm. I think the most satisfying part of this interview was hearing that you really felt that you were representing all of the fans' pure love, and that when he saw you in the crowd and he saw your face and your other friends, that he felt, secure in a sense. And I think that's something that a lot of us wish that we could have given to him. And so thankfully you were there. And Sherry said that we can see why Michael liked you, because light attracts light. Someone said that you were a light fairy. Yeah, some people are saying that you're a light fairy and that you're an empath, and it's going on and on. People are saying that Well, you got to go back and read the comments later because
I don't
people
want
are.
to get a big head either, but thank you, everyone. You're so
Yeah.
kind.
No, you deserve it.
No, I don't, though. I don't. I was just very lucky. And I'll never understand why.
Oh
I'll
yeah.
never understand why.
But he loved you. I mean, you could tell by the book you talk about, or you mentioned, or somebody told you that they discovered that there's a picture of you and Joanna, right?
Which Joanna? Because there's a couple.
I'm not sure. In the book, it just refers
the English girl. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, then he had a picture of you girls.
Yes. That's right.
Room and that sort of thing. So obviously, you meant a lot to him
Thank you.
for him to display your picture there.
Yeah.
In the dressing room and aw.
It's very obvious. Oh, wow. I'm glad that we had the chance to sit down with you. I know that you haven't done these kind of live, in-person video interviews, but we are so blessed that you were okay to do this with us and you were open to doing it. And it's a very rare treat for us to have these kind of stories. And just wanted to, on behalf of everyone, because I'm just reading all the comments, to say again, thank you for being here with us and spending this time.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I feel blessed to have this opportunity. Thank you for making me a part of your wonderful book club. I feel very honored, and thank you to everybody who's joined in and who's here watching. And shout out to you all. Lots of love.
Yes.
To my MJ family.
All over the world.
Yeah,
and
all over the world. It's amazing.
Yes. And I think with that, Tammy, I think we can say goodbye, right?
Yes. Thank you again, Talitha, for agreeing to speak with us. It's beautiful to hear your story and to read your book. And
thank you.
Yes. And there's a couple of very quotable things that you said, the way you have a way with words, and there are a couple things that I'm going to go back and write down because they were so powerful.
Thank you.
And so everyone that's watching, MJ Book Club members and also others from YouTube and Twitter, thank you so much for joining us today. This is the Michael Jackson Book Club of Facebook. We're signing off. And feel free to go back if you missed part of the interview. This will be recorded in the Facebook group and also on YouTube. You can go back and watch it from the beginning instantly within a few minutes after we end this broadcast. And again, go and find Talitha's book. I got mine on Amazon, but I know it's available in other places as well, right? And you have a website.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Okay.
It's michaeljacksonandme.com.
Yes. And we'll make sure we put all of that in a post on our page. Do you have any information on international shipping? Any special instructions?
I mean, it's available in stores around the world, and there are a couple of websites. You can see on my website, if you just scroll down a little bit, you'll find all of the links to where it's available. And there's a couple that seem to ship almost globally. And if you have any trouble finding it, please reach out to me or to my friend who manages my social media. She helps out with that. So just reach out on social media, and we will help you to find a copy if you're having difficulty with that.
Okay, wonderful. And you're
the one after we just hang on in the back, okay?
Okay.
We go off, okay?
Okay, yeah, sure.
And you're on Facebook and Twitter
and Instagram.
Instagram.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we'll make sure we post all of that. And again, thank you so much. And
thank you.
All right, everyone, we're gonna sign off.
Bye.
Bye-bye, wherever you are in the world. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.